And I think we'll get started. So welcome to Dakota Rural Action's Farm Bill webinar. And I believe we're going to spend some time today talking about the history of the Farm Bill for those of you unfamiliar with it, an overview of what makes up the Farm Bill and why it matters, updates on the process right now where it is, and we're going to then talk about, at the end, we're going to talk about the priorities for Dakota Rural Action. You're going to get your chance to vote on your top 3. And so here very soon, I'm going to turn it over to Megan and Patty to start with. And if presenters could take a moment to introduce themselves, which I will do right now, which I forgot to. My name is Frank James, and I'm the director of Dakota Rural Action. I live north of Brookings, South Dakota, and I've been working on farm bills since, well, before I even was working, because my family farms. So like the 1985 Farm Bill and the 1990 Farm Bills were important farm bills to my family. So I've been talking about farm bills and the policies in them since I was like 16 years old. Okay. A little bit more about Dakota Rural Action. This is our mission statement, but we work on a variety of issues. And from, I know Walter's on the phone, and Walter is one of our members and supporters who is interested in the carbon pipeline organizing we're doing. So that's part of what we do. And we also work on agricultural issues at the state level and the federal level and at the local level, including ongoing issues to try and give people in local communities a voice in the decisions that are made by their community about the siting of really large animal facilities, and promoting of agriculture that is more gentle to the people involved, the land involved, and the animals involved. So history, I believe, Megan, this is your cue, right? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Megan Eisenboss, new food systems organizer with Dakota Rural Action. Been on staff since January, and the Farm Bill has been sort of a priority that I've been working on since starting with Dakota Rural Action. So I've learned quite a bit in the last several months, but then obviously don't have the history or experience that Frank has, but have been really fascinated by the complexities of the Farm Bill, and have had the pleasure of working with Patty, who's also on our call, Patty Lavera, who is working, like Patty can probably introduce herself as well.
Sure, can do that.
If not,
Hey, everybody.
for that.
My name is Patty Lavera. I am based in Washington, D.C. I'm actually in New York at the moment at a meeting in this very interesting looking hotel room. And so I do policy work on the Farm Bill and other federal policy for a coalition called Campaign for Family Farms and the Environment, and DRA is one of the members.
And so this timeline is something I had put together for a different webinar, and the top of it is all of the different farm bills. So the Farm Bill is a policy that gets updated every 5 years. It's been around since the 30s, and has had some key moments that have taken us to where we are today. And it's this timeline is just a whole hodgepodge of different things that were going on, that kind of were relevant into the food system, and we won't go through any of those things. I'll just highlight that the Dust Bowl, or the Great Depression in the 30s, is what kickstarted the need. It was a time of great uncertainty for farmers and hunger in the country, and so the Farm Bill was the policy that was to be the solution. At that time, 1 in 4 Americans lived on a farm, which is hard to imagine today. And through the years, you can see the population moved off the farm. And then in the 60s started the Green Revolution, which is not really considering the word green that you might think of today, but instead this era of maximizing production and growing, well, that started more in the 80s too. So, but that Green Revolution of really maximizing production, which then takes us into the 80s there. And Earl Butz was our Secretary of Ag at that time and had some important changes to the policy that I would say are still reverberating today in the way food is, the types of crops that are grown and what's incentivized or not to grow. And in response to Earl Butz's policies came this counter movement of organic and more natural systems. And so then organic farming was first included in the Farm Bill in 1985. And that is when also more conservation programs were included. And we'll get into more of that. But that's like a brief smash course in some key things that I had learned. I don't know, Patty, if you have anything to highlight there or touch on our different perspective.
No, I mean, these are all, it's nice to see it on the timeline. I mean, basically, you can say there were changes in agriculture that were caused by the Farm Bill, or the Farm Bill responded to changes in agriculture, and probably both are true. And, you know, there's definitely these eras, right? And so one of the trends that you see, and I know Megan's going to get there, we'll talk about, like, there's a lot of moving parts of a Farm Bill, but what gets a lot of attention on, like, when people kind of talk about the eras of the Farm Bill is like which sectors of agriculture are getting the most elaborate and variety of kinds of support. You know, and we're still at the point where folks who are growing, you know, specialty crops, which is Farm Bill jargon for fruits and vegetables, you know, they're still in the margins of the bill. If you look at, like, kind of like the words and the money and, like, kind of the variety of programs, and a lot of what this timeline has been about the whole time has been the kind of the commodity crops, like the big acreage, you know, row crops that are storable, you know, and that's really dominated a lot of the Farm Bill for a long time. And that still dominates the Farm Bill, but it's not the only thing. And that's been one of the things that's changed over time, is more focus on conservation, more focus on other types of markets and things like that. But the commodity crops are still driving the process. And then the flip side of that is nutrition assistance. And I'm pretty sure Megan's going to get to that, but another driver of the whole process.
You can go ahead to the next slide, Frank. These are, so Dakota Rural Action has memberships with a lot of other organizations that do a lot of work in policy. Patty mentioned she's with the Campaign for Family Farms and the Environment. We also have gotten a lot of support or guidance from National Family Farm Coalition and the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. We're part of Western Organization Resource Councils, which we have Michael and Elizabeth with us today. So that's awesome to have you here. And then REAMP is another one. And there may be others that I'm not aware of as well.
And just
Can
so
you go to the next slide?
people have asked what the acronym REAMP stands for, and it really doesn't stand for anything anymore, but it is a group of more Midwestern organizations that work on issues like the Farm Bill.
And so this is a pie chart, obviously, of the funds that from the last Farm Bill passed in 2018 have distributed over the last 5 years. And the largest chunk is encompassing the nutrition programs, including SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, and funding for child nutrition programs, farm to school, different grant incentives for purchasing nutritious foods or local foods. The SNAP was food stamps back in the 70s and then became SNAP in 2008 and has continued progression to become less stigmatized so that people are more comfortable utilizing the resources if it is something they need or qualify for. It also, as you can see, is a huge amount of money if this of this whole chart and of the whole pot, and so causes a lot of controversy or debate about how much should we be spending on the nutrition versus farming things, and can be a debate maybe between urban and rural states, but is a huge part of why the Farm Bill ends up getting passed. And that's more political jargon that I'm not as familiar with. It's the biggest, SNAP is the biggest fight, support against hunger, but is a big source of debate these days. The other sections are crop insurance, commodities, and the conservation funding are the big sections of the pie there. And so these pie charts are from NSAC, the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. And so on the left, it has a closer zoomed in version on those other sections of the pie chart. And so without the nutrition component. And you can see of those, crop insurance is the largest point. Crop insurance is a little complicated because often the specialty crops or the foods that are grown for people to eat are not able to get crop insurance. Then we go to the conservation programs, and so we'll touch base on those a little bit later, and some incentives to have sustainable practices, and the commodity programs or subsidies for the main crops. And then on the right, it breaks down more of the other category or the smaller programs of what all of the different sections might be getting money. An important one, I think, is the research component, that a lot of ag research gets a small part of the funding. And again, the specialty crops, what we actually eat, gets just such a tiny part of the federal funding for the Farm Bill. Patty, anything to add there or points?
No, this is a good way to think about it, because there's a lot, and this will happen. It's happening right now, actually, right? Like, as Congress tries to figure out what to do about the debt ceiling, the Republican proposal is, well, we'll give you an extension on the debt ceiling if you cut these social safety nets, and the biggest one is SNAP. So it really is part of this kind of ideological battle, and it will drive a lot of the timing of the Farm Bill. Like, probably when debate over this Farm Bill gets stuck, this will be one of the most likely reason, is kind of this like cultural fight about SNAP. We're all along for the ride, even if the SNAP isn't our top priority, because it's a big package deal. There's a bunch of stuff in it. And these charts kind of give you a sense of, like, setting aside SNAP, there's still a lot going on in the Farm Bill. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of different parts. And one way to think about it is, with a few exceptions, if the U.S. Department of Agriculture works on it, it's probably in the Farm Bill. So, like, yes, it's crop insurance, conservation, and commodities, but it's also lots of local food promotion programs that get wrapped up and called LAMP, local agricultural marketing programs, lots of research that USDA does or pays for, at land grants, all kinds of technical assistance and lots of other things. And even a tiny Farm Bill program is not that tiny sometimes in terms of money. And, there's an energy title, there's a forestry title, there's a trade title, because for lots of reasons, our agriculture is really export oriented. So USDA spends money and effort finding new markets for US products. I mean, there's an astonishing array of stuff in this bill because it's such a big package.
Thanks, guys. I think before I move on to the next slide, I'll ask people to introduce themselves in the chat, just your name and where you're from and your affiliation with an organization if you have one. So that's kind of our introduction section. We'll moment for any questions, but we probably should be moving on too. So anyone have any questions?
And there are so many different ways to it's such a big bill to break down the different components and history. If you think of other questions that you have or want to find more information, you could look up any of those organizations I mentioned that we're affiliated with, or reach out to Frank, and we can get you some more information about the Farm Bill too. But hopefully you learn more throughout the rest of the webinar too. If you have questions, I can also see them in the chat.
So now we're going to go into the sections of the current Farm Bill that DRA works on. And these are the things that we have been at the table for, either some for a long time and some more recently. But one of the parts of our work has been around the conservation title, it's called, and around these programs that make up the conservation title, which are Conservation Reserve Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, and the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And they all do they try and do the conservation a little bit differently. CRP is a long-term set-aside program for marginalized land that is being farmed. The Conservation Stewardship Program is an attempt to work with producers to develop a system on their farm that encourages conservation practices. And so one of the hot practices going on right now, at least in commodity growing, that's being really implemented by a number of commodity growers, is a cover crop system. And one of the reasons that got popular was because through the CSP program, producers the cost share for the seed to plant those cover crops was part of that was covered. The EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, is really focused more on animal agriculture, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that one because there's some really good things that the EQIP program does, and there's some things that we have problems with as well. And you can see a little bit more detail at the bottom about that. I'm not going to go into the details on this right now. And so as a part, I mentioned this, the problem with EQIP, and this is under the heading of fighting against federal funds that promote CAFOs. And CAFO stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operations. These are the really, really large factory style, I don't want to call them farms, factory style production systems that consolidate a lot of animals in one place, consolidate a lot of waste in one place, cause hardship for the community, cause pollution both to the ground and surface water, and really destroy a family system of agriculture, especially livestock production agriculture. So CAFOs, we've seen them start at like 1,000 animals, and now we're seeing dairies being built that have 15,000 dairy cows on them. It's just, if you grew up around a 100-cow dairy, it's crazy to think of those numbers. But one of the problems with EQIP is that while there's a lot of good things it does, and actually in South Dakota it's used pretty well, but in other states, the funding from EQIP is being used to finance the manure handling systems for the CAFOs, and more recently to finance the building of something new. They're called methane biodigesters. and they're large industrial facilities that use the manure from the CAFO to produce methane, and that methane through a cleaning system is made into a cleaner product and is eventually sold or transported through the natural gas pipelines. And in some cases it's used on the farm for heating water or something like that. But a lot of these bigger ones are definitely made to export that energy source. And the problem is, it all sounds good. The problem is they're too big, they're dangerous. In Texas, there was one that recently exploded. They leak, and they're dangerous because if they leak, you can suffocate if you're too near them. And there have been cases of workers suffocating around them. The second part of this is the USDA has a system of giving loans to farmers, both direct loans and guaranteed loans. And the guaranteed loans, the caps are too high. And the guaranteed loans, I should explain, are loans that are made by a lending agency, but they're guaranteed, I believe, up to 90% by the USDA. So the lending agency is willing to make these loans because they're not taking a great deal of risk. And it's a good idea, really, to encourage local banks and lending institutions to actually invest in agriculture. The problem is they have been focused more and more on the largest number, dollar number, and there's only a certain amount of capacity every year that's allowed total for the USDA to guarantee in these loans. And if there are a few large loans being given out, there are fewer loans overall. So beginning farmers and small farmers and organic farmers can't access them because they're gone. They're basically, the cap has been hit. And the other part is when they're much larger, they can be used to finance these really large operations, these confined animal feeding operations. And so we are pushing to have that lending cap reduced to a smaller amount so that shifts the loans to smaller producers who need smaller amounts of money. Another big part of what we work on is fixing the ag markets. And this is a big part of it. Two of the things that are involved in this is a mandatory country of origin labeling. And there is a bill, I'm gonna get a little wonky here and say that all of these ideas out that we're talking about are represented by different bills that different congressional members have introduced, and they're what's called a marker bill. And the idea is to get the bill introduced and then have it rolled into the farm bill. So the mandatory country of origin labeling bill is right now called the American Beef Labeling Act, and it is co-sponsored by Senator Thune from South Dakota, Senator Tester from Montana, and Senator Booker from Ohio. And so main sponsors. And we support that. Back in the early 2000s, after the 2008 Farm Bill, we had mandatory country of origin labeling on meat, beef, pork, lamb, chicken, a number of things. And the American producer really saw a benefit from that because the prices went up because the consumer had more information about what they were buying. In 2015, due to a action from Canada and Mexico, that our country of origin labeling law was found to be anti-competitive. And rather than defending it, the Congress at the time got rid of it. And we saw a crash in the livestock markets after that was gotten rid of. And it was another piece of what continued the consolidation of the control of the livestock market into a few hands of packers. The other bill is a bill that's being sponsored by Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, and it's called the Strengthening Local Meat Economies Act. And this is a bill that would direct the governments and the institutions to buy what they need for meat from smaller packing plants. Right now, millions of dollars gets paid to the big four, we call them, the four largest packing plants or packing owners in the nation, and they are subsidized by being able to sell a large amount of meat to the federal government, to state government, to schools, all that sort of thing. So this is a bill that would set up a process that guarantees that the USDA that 5% of the procurements comes from these smaller plants. And it sets up a way for those smaller producers to actually have a digital exchange so that the people who need large amounts of meat can actually go to the exchange and buy it from a number of different small packers, because they probably wouldn't have the capacity to provide for one of these big purchases. But this is a way of like having that be a competitive market and have it be a place where those meat can be consolidated and put into such an amount that the federal government, the schools can use it and purchase it. We talked a little bit about this, but the Beginning Farmer Training is a very small program in the Farm Bill, but it's something that we support. We have been Dakota Rural Action since the middle 2000s has been running a beginning farmer training program called the Farm Beginnings Program. And over those years, we've trained over 200 families on how to think about farming, how to make a farm plan. And many of them are actively engaged in farming. And part of that program was funded by funding that came through the Farm Bill for this type of training. In addition to that, we support that this funding goes to specifically beginning farmers and food producers who are people of color who are trying to get started in agriculture, because we know, and we have allied organizations that work with us who represent farmers of color and producers of color that tell amazingly bad stories about the way they're treated by the funding processes within the Department of Agriculture. And so we want to support our friends who support us on other things to say that there should be a special attention given to making sure that funding goes to training farmers of colors who have basically disappeared from agriculture. Those that are still farming have done so through great hardship and are very interested in seeing new farmers come into agriculture. We also think that this type of program for support, it needs to be thought through carefully, because first generation producers who don't come from a family farm background and young producers have a real problem finding access to land and other needed resources to start farming. And when we have asked beginning farmers that we know about the main impediments, access to land is always one of the first things on that list. This is just to highlight that a little bit more, that it's 6-to-1 of the farmers in the US. For every 6 farmers over the age of 65, there's one farmer or producer under the age of 35. That has gotten worse over the years. And it's a real concern, because we all need to be concerned about who's going to produce our food into the future. As related to that, we support Farm Bill programs that Patty kind of mentioned, like the LAMP program, that promote and expand local and regional food systems. A couple of specific things here is we want to improve the grant program that's out there, the LAMP program, and there's another one who's got letters that I can't remember. so that it improves grant access for organizations, producers and in underserved communities. What we are finding with these programs is it takes a well-financed producer or organization to actually get the funding. And so it misses the mark when it's trying to get this funding into a community that wants to build and be participant in a local or regional food system. So we want to reduce the match from 50% to 25% for the value-added producer grant. And then we want specific funds to go for building local food systems that low-income families can access. One of the really successful programs that we have members who manage farmers markets use is something called Double Up Bucks, and it's a part of the SNAP program, and it allows people who come to the farmers market to get double the amount of their SNAP benefits to purchase food at the farmers market from local producers. In addition, we want the funding to be what it can be spent for to be loosened so that it can be used to buy like general purpose equipments like refrigerated trucks, making food safety upgrades, which many need to do in order to continue to do the value added things that they're doing. But in the past, those upgrades weren't covered and they can be very expensive. And then we want money to help coordinate and build a value chain among these regional food system producers and regional food systems themselves. Little off the beaten path, but there is an energy title, and one of the things that's going to be considered in the energy title, and I should say to begin with, these are funds that have been allocated in the Inflation Recovery Act, and much of what we're trying to do is make sure that the Farm Bill is not used to claw back those monies. And so this is funding that would go to our rural electric associations, the cooperatives that provide electricity to pretty much everyone who lives in a rural area. And what has happened is that they have been underfunded for many years, because the history of the rural electrics is the investor-owned utilities built power stations and lines to all the towns, but they wouldn't serve the rural farmers and producers between the towns. And so the USDA and the rural electric, I can't remember what it's called, but the people who started the rural electric cooperatives used federal funding, local funding, individual funding to build the system, but it has been not well funded. And one of the things that has happened is while they were building a production system based on coal at the time, they basically spent all their money building coal plants. And the way the payment program is built right now, they will never pay them off, which means they will never upgrade their production system, and they will very rarely be able to invest in other types of production, more renewable types of production. And so this are two programs that help. One helps address that specifically, and one is that that helps them build and upgrade their energy programs for the consumers that they provide for. Michael, anything you want to add to that?
No, just wanted to highlight this note that you have at the bottom, where this isn't a typical allocation that we see in the Farm Bill. This is something that was passed during last year's Inflation Reduction Act reconciliation fight. So because that was a partisan vote, which was supported only by Democrats in the House and Senate and the president, it definitely has anything that got passed in that package has a bit of a target on its back. And kind of like what Patty was saying earlier, we're already seeing some of these programs that we care about be targeted, both in say the debt ceiling fight, and we're going to see it in the Farm Bill fight. So a lot of the work that needs to be done from grassroots organizations is just like sticking up for these important programs that will invest in these entities and, decarbonize some of the dirtiest section of our electric grid in the United States and support rural communities at the same time.
And Michael and I have been on calls with two of the staff from two of our South Dakota congressional delegation. And we think we have support from those two, from Thune and Johnson. Did I get that right, Michael, or did we meet with Rounds instead?
We've met with Rounds in the past, and this did come up in passing, if I remember that conversation correctly. And I would say that like the line is that we like these we like these programs. We don't like the way in which they were passed, which was through like this partisan mechanism of budget reconciliation, which is a whole other rabbit hole that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But so the politics are a little complicated, but essentially they see the idea as good. So
Right.
that's helpful.
It is complicated, but basically they support these programs, but they also kind of left them, especially in the House, they left space to be able to vote for a debt ceiling deal that may strip the money from these programs, knowing that that probably won't pass the Senate. And so it's a political vote, and they just want to, Johnson in this case, just wants to have that political wiggle room to do that. So that's the politics here. And then finally, food assistance, and we've talked a little bit about this, but this is also wrapped up in the debt ceiling conversation, and in this overall fight about what we're funding with the Farm Bill. And there are going to be attempts to reduce funding. There are going to be attempts, including a bill from Dusty Johnson, to adjust the work requirements and make them stricter. And those work requirements and the funding overall is also be challenged in like the debt ceiling conversation. And the thing I want to point about food systems and this amount of money that goes to food systems is without the historical co-support from urban legislators for the farm programs, because they were packaged with the food assistance programs, we would never have had a farm bill. And the last few farm bills, we have seen these attempts to split them. And for rural people, that's an incredibly bad idea, because it might work for a farm bill or two where we would split off food assistance and they would reduce funding to food assistance and continue to fund farm bill programs. But in the long term, the power, electoral power in the Congress, especially the Congress, sits with the urban legislators. And eventually, and every expert I've talked to says this, eventually the farm bill programs would dwindle, and we would lose support for not only the small farmers that we're concerned about, but the large farmers would also lose the support that they have been building over the years and generations of the Farm Bill. That's despite, there's a lot of like values-based reasons that DRA this isn't a priority for us necessarily, although I'm going to ask you if it is, but it is something we're concerned about because we produce food and we want people to have food. So thank you. If you have any questions, what I'm going to do, I think, is I've got a poll that if I know how to use, I'm going to open up, and I'd like you to vote for of those like buckets. If you could vote for your top 3 priorities out of those buckets, if you have the ability to do this, that would be helpful for DRA staff to kind of know what to put at the top of the list, I guess. And at the same time, I'm willing to take any questions, and we got people on the phone. Patty may have left, I can't tell, but she was shoehorning us in, but we have other people on the phone who can answer questions. So if you have any questions about the Farm Bill, about the politics, about the programs, we'd be happy to answer them. Or if you have any comments, there's so few of us that if you got something you want to say, we sure can do that as well.
I would just want to highlight that on the call, there are a few of us that have been able to go to DC to talk with our congressman's staff, Trish and Gabby, Rain and I, and Michael, obviously. But I don't know if you want to share something that you learned or that you really appreciated during those Farm Bill interactions too.
I'll just add like one thing that I think is interesting, and and I appreciate Frank you bringing up that, you know, the nutrition assistance program isn't something that we typically see as, you know, maybe in our wheelhouse or in like our wheelhouse of issues. But the irony I really think is that yes, like this like alliance, right, between like urban legislators and rural legislators is like kind of the origin story of how this package kind of came together and has existed for the past several decades. But it's not that rural people don't use these programs. And I think that there's a false equivalence that gets built up a lot of the time, right? Where like we all know neighbors that like, you know, have had a hard year and had to go on SNAP and, you know, make sure that they like stay afloat and stay solvent and have food on the table. And rural counties also tend to be persistent poverty counties. So this is also just a matter of like survival in our towns and states. So I think that I think there's an interesting question to be had about, as people that care about rural places and rural communities, like how can we shut down like these false equivalences that get brought up in these sorts of meetings? And because like, you know, people like our opposition and people that don't necessarily agree with us would like to find reasons to kind of like wedge us and separate us from our friends. So how can we so I think there's just an interesting question here, right? About like, how do we like hold firm on some of our ideals while also like having space to talk about some of the things where we might have more common ground with some of these offices, like when we talk about market reform or when we talk about local foods, as opposed to say like SNAP or some of the more environmentally friendly forms of farming. So that's just something I'd like to add to the conversation, where there is a national conversation that's being had, and then there's also like the unique perspective that DRA brings to DC. So it really just depends on how you all want to position yourselves. And I think there's value in either way you want to do it.
Thank you. Yes. And so I closed the poll. First time I ever used this tool, by the way. So yay me. But the results are interesting. So the top vote getter was the conservation programs. And then it was the beginning farmer, rancher, producer training and funding. And then it was pretty evenly divided among the other programs, the market reform, the fighting support for CAFOs, defending SNAP, and energy and co-op funding. So I think what we're going to do is I'm recording this presentation and we'll share it out with people to watch. And I think at the same time, I will develop a poll for people to participate in, asking these questions, and so we can get more members' input. Because if you had asked me this morning how this poll was going to go, I wouldn't have said it would have gone that way. So any questions, any comments? This went faster than I thought, which is also something that I need to learn about doing these, but that was actually a good result. So any questions? And I want to point out that Charlie Johnson, who's joining us, is in his tractor farming. You're on mute, Charlie. If you're trying to talk to us, you're on mute.
Okay, one thing I'm going to bring up, and I know it's probably an unpopular position, even with our Dakota Rural Action allies, but especially with the main stem organizations, is that we need to reform the crop insurance program, because if we really realize what's going on in agriculture today, it's the generous crop insurance program that's driving cash rents higher, land markets higher, and it's creating a big, what I could say, land access gap for beginning farmers. And ironically, the only way you're going to get more young farmers on the land and having their own enterprises is to create more risk for the main bigger mega farmers, because they can go out and pay top cash rent, grab acres and farms across county lines, and do it all with the security, knowing that the federal government's going to guarantee them 90% of their income at the end of the year. And the only way you're going to get better conservation is to get these large farmers off their corn and soybean kick also. And again, crop insurance is propping that thing up. If I had my vote for tomorrow, I would vote to eliminate the crop insurance program, even though it would hurt me personally, perhaps as a producer today. In the long run, it would be a better policy for rural America to get rid of it.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I will say there are parts of the Farm Bill that we know about that didn't make this list for any number of reasons. One, because it would be too long, but yesterday I saw a proposal from OAFA, the organic, I can't remember, but they're a organic organization made up of the states of Ohio. They're in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and some of those states, for reforming crop insurance. And I glanced at it, I read through it, I read through the press release. It looks like a good proposal, and it's something else I'll be sharing out to folks as we get into this to get your input on. But yeah, crop insurance, and if you remember the graph that Megan shared, crop insurance is one of the biggest parts of the farm part of the Farm Bill as far as where money goes. And it is incredibly generous to commodity style, conventional commodity crop growers. And it's actually really expensive, because I saw in another meeting, I saw a graph from the OMB when they were scoring different proposals in the Farm Bill, that it's fair. The Farm Bill is fairly cheap over the next few years, but in like 2026, 7, 8, 9, it shoots up in price, which means, of course, that commodity prices are going to be low, and the support that the federal government is going to have to provide through the crop insurance program is going to be much higher, and the overall cost of the Farm Bill is going to be incredibly expensive.
And I'll add that I was tuning into the subcommittee on commodities and trade for House Agriculture today, and they had representatives from the Soybean Growers Association, corn, I forget what they call them, but like chickpeas and beans, and every single one of them noted that crop insurance was the most important thing to them in the Farm Bill, and they wanted more. They wanted more guarantees. They wanted more money. They wanted fewer restrictions. They wanted less oversight. They wanted better access. It's just, yeah, it's a little, it's something that we'll have to learn to talk about, and it's complicated and wonky. But know that, like, yeah, there are massive forces at play that work tirelessly every single Farm Bill cycle to make sure that this just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh, thanks, Walter. Walter says in the chat that he quit crop insurance because it was too expensive, which it is for smaller producers. And it was too much hassle, which it also is, especially if you use what's called the whole farm program that a lot of fruits and vegetables producers have to use. And it's a complicated process. They've tried to improve, but it's still a complicated process to get that sort of insurance. Jeremy and Trish, you don't use any federal crop insurance, do you? Nodding the heads of no.
No, we haven't even, like on our scale, we haven't even looked at it inquisitively. It's just been a piece that exists over there. So,
You know, in your free time, just as an interesting experiment, it might be interesting to have you go into the USDA offices and see if anyone there even understands the whole farm crop insurance
yeah,
section. To see if anyone, you know, can actually talk to you intelligently about what you would have to do for your multi-species, very diverse urban farm.
yeah, that would be interesting to find out. So, yeah, I feel like on the crop insurance note, one of the things that came up in my recent meetings in DC was the crop insurance connection with agricultural practices that are what's the right word, like hindering progress on climate change. So like crop insurance subsidizing bad practices for adapting to or mitigating the effects, agriculture's effects on the climate. So I feel like teasing out a way of stopping paying people to have bad land management. And I don't know enough about crop insurance. I like Charlie's idea of just getting rid of the whole thing. That seemed easier for me, at least, not knowing anything about it. So, and I may have paraphrased your idea there, Charlie. So.
Really, it's really going to be the only answer in the end, because you could take a line of how the land markets and the crop rents have risen in the last 10 to 20 years, and then draw the same line on a graph for the increases in generosity toward the crop insurance program, and they're almost parallel. And so we're just going to continue on a trend of more $15,000, $20,000 land and $400 or $500 an acre cash rents if we don't get rid of the program. And yet, I know politically it's unpopular, even with a lot of the Democrats and liberals in Congress, because they've all found favor with all the mainstream ag organizations, and that's their number one priority. You get them on a radio station, you get them on a program, you get them on a speaking tour, and it's all about crop insurance, almost 90 to 100% on their farm platform. I mean, if you had a webinar being put on by the commodity organizations like we've had here tonight, or Farm Bureau, 90% of the discussion would be about crop insurance on the same kind of a webinar.
Well, and I think the reality is, at least for this farm bill, even like proposals that are good to reform it, to make it useful to organic and smaller producers, are probably dead on arrival as well. And I feel bad for OFA because it looks like they put a lot of thinking into their proposal. And I need to read it fully to talk more intelligently about it, but just from the press release, it really looked like they've interviewed farmers and they've asked about their use of it, and they had some smart policy people work it through, and it may not even get really considered in this farm bill, unfortunately. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I really appreciate everyone for participating. And you know, I will put this video out, and we may do this again if this was useful. We may do this again in a few months when things change, because the whole thing is going to change in a few months. So thank you all for your time.